We'll talk about VRR in a minute, but the real most important change here is on the physical device itself. The ports are all on the back. Well, the analog input is on the front, but it should be. But the HDMI and USB ports are all together. Every other USB HD card from Elgato has had ports on two sides, and it was awful. Thank you, Elgato, for finally seeing the error in your ways after all these years. In many ways, beyond this superficial kind of thing, this might be Elgato's best capture card ever. But it's not perfect. The HD60 X does not have HDMI 2.1, unfortunately. We're not there yet. I do have a super secret workaround if you do want to play PS5 or Xbox Series X in 4K 120Hz and VRR and then capture in 1440p or 1080p to 120Hz VRR with this card. But more on that later. But what it does have is a feature that I thought might be holding HDMI 2.1 capture cards back. Variable refresh rate support. Just not G-Sync. Let me explain. So this capture card will do real-time lag-free pass-through with HDMI 2.0 of non-ultra-wide formats. So that's 1080p up to 240 FPS, 1440p up to 120 FPS, and 4K up to 60 Hz. All tested and working fine. 100 Hz also did work at 1440p for me as well, but 144 Hz and 165 Hz do not. That's pass-through, to your monitor or TV. Capture-wise, you can record 4K 30 FPS and 1440p or lower at 60 FPS. No higher than 60 FPS capture at any resolution, and no 60 Hz capture at 4K still, but that's above the normal USB 3.0 bandwidth. Though I feel like we're getting to a point where USB 3.1 10 gigabit cards would not be too restrictive. Again, ultra-wide doesn't work. I was able to clone my 3440 by 1440 monitor to the card for a moment, but then the driver freaked out and gave me a ton of errors, and it never worked again. It's not officially supported anyway, but hey. I think the capture is limited to 60 FPS to work better with adaptive sync. HDR 10-bit can be passed through up to 4K 60 and captured at 1080p 60 in 4K capture utility in Windows, or HDR to SDR tone mapping can be done everywhere else, so you can play in HDR and stream or record in SDR. I weirdly did not get HDR detection to pass through to my BenQ monitor. It's only a 400 nits monitor, so nothing is really lost, but I found that odd. HDR with PS5 running on my LG CX worked great, however. But it's not a perfect experience. Trying to record on device HDR to SDR tone mapping in 4K capture utility kept throwing me an error as if my GPU couldn't handle it, even though it handled HDR fine. Recording HDR on an older rig with a 1070 Ti GPU completely trashed some of my best multiplayer matches for this video. A curse that I have of awesome multiplayer matches not being recorded properly that I've had for like 15 years. I hate this curse. And then when passing my PS5 through to OBS, the recordings are surprisingly dark. This can kind of be compensated for filters in OBS and is likely just due to calibration settings on the PS5. I play on a super bright OLED, but you'll need to calibrate your console's HDR profile with your capture card preview pulled up and kept in mind for the best results here. HDR is a mess. I'm not a fan. Frankly, if I'm going to stream, I'm probably just going to set it to SDR anyway.
Standing by. Our UAV is online. Airstrike standing by.
There's a pretty nice scaler inside the HD60S, though it can be kind of limiting. 4K gameplay can be evenly scaled down to 1080p, but you cannot play at 4K and record 1440p. That being said, 1440p is not an even division in 4K, so you shouldn't be doing that anyway, and recording with a high enough CQP value makes scaling 1080p to 4K a non-issue, but worth keeping in mind. Many of the oddball formats from systems we'll test later also get scaled down to 1080p as well. 720p and 1080p from older consoles or the Nintendo Switch work just fine too. HD60 X is a UVC capture card, meaning it's plug and play. It will show up as a webcam to most video conferencing apps, and it works in Mac too. Well, kinda. When plugging into my M1 Mac Mini, I couldn't get it to allow 1440p pass through to my monitor, only 1080p up to 120 Hz. Not sure what's up with that. Okay, quick update as I'm editing this video. If you plug the capture card in a direct USB Type-A port on a Mac, it actually does work. However, those ports are super sparse on a Mac, and just like quite a few UVC capture cards I've actually tested, if you plug it in USB-C to C in a Type-C or Thunderbolt port, that's where things start getting funky. However, plugging it in the Type-A port only exposed 1440p 60. Every time I set it to 120 Hz, you still get dropped down to 1080p. So I have no clue what's going on. The capture card also works plug and play in OBS on Linux, but a similar issue arises where 4K 1440p are exposed, but the second you set it to 120 Hz, it drops to 1080p. Don't know if that's a UVC thing, don't know if it's unique to this capture card, what's going on, but it's annoying.
Enemy UAV active.
Latency-wise, this is surprisingly the fastest capture card I've ever actually tested, faster than even the PCIe Live Gamer 4K, which previously held the crown. Pass-through to your monitor or TV is real-time and lag-free, confirmed using the TimeSleuth latency tester, but pass-through to OBS preview is 31 milliseconds. 31 milliseconds. This is getting into as much as a bad TV latency territory, which is going to be a lot more playable from the preview for some people. I don't recommend it for shooters or for picky platformers, but it can be done. 4K capture utility is significantly slower, however, producing a 112 millisecond preview with this card. Not only is this the fastest capture card that I've tested to date as a championing of awesomeness, but that also means you'll have an easy time keeping audio in sync with it, which is pretty cool. It's been a little while since I've posted a capture card review. Part of the reason for that is I've been overhauling my studio and workflow behind the scenes, taking stock of my review units, and making sure that 2022 is going to be topped off with only the best content. Details like this are covered in my Nebula exclusive video, The Next Phase of EposVox, and you'll see a lot more of it in my upcoming Maker video series covering my 3D printing and project building adventures. Nebula is my own video site I built with my creator friends to house content like that, which wouldn't perform well on YouTube thanks to good old retention algorithms and things like that. And they're ad-free. I'll be posting a lot of Nebula exclusive content over the next year. You don't want to miss it. Speaking of sync, obviously the big selling point here is support for VRR, or variable refresh rate, also called adaptive sync. This allows you to pass through signals from your game consoles, specifically the Xbox Series S and X at the moment, though PlayStation did just announce that VRR will become a PS5 feature in the coming months, so that's exciting. About time. Most notably there is that it is stated that you'll be able to enable VRR for any game on PS5, even games not optimized for it, which you can't currently do on Xbox. On PC, however, it's only FreeSync, or the general HDMI VISA-compatible VRR, which I don't think anything actually uses. So that means if you're rocking an NVIDIA GPU, you cannot use it at this time. I know conversations are happening for GSync certification in general on more devices, but nothing for this capture card at the moment. That means even with a FreeSync display that you can force GSync compatible on, you still can't use it with this card if you have an NVIDIA GPU. Bummer. I don't own any worthwhile modern AMD GPUs at the moment since they've not been keeping up with content creation or streaming workflows or features, so I can't really test that. And Intel GPUs don't even support adaptive sync or VRR over HDMI yet, only DisplayPort. The advantage here is, of course, being able to game with adaptive sync or VRR in the first place, meaning a smooth experience free of screen tearing on your TV or monitor. But it also means you can reduce screen tearing in your streams too. Dual PC streaming setups are virtually always plagued with screen tearing when capture cards are involved if VSync isn't used. You can optimize for this by setting your refresh rate to a multiple of 60 and managing your game settings to maintain that target frame rate and then enable something like NVIDIA FastSync and so on, but it's still almost always there. It should be less of an issue here, but again, the lack of GSync support really limits who will actually benefit from this. With VRR enabled on your console or PC, the source format listing and 4K capture utility will actually change the listed frame rate dynamically as it changes in-game on your system. This is really neat. If you go over 60 FPS, obviously it's sampled down to 60 for your capture. If you go under, then you'll have duplicate frames in your 60 FPS capture. It's not magic after all. It not being magic also means that if you do use a refresh rate that isn't a multiple of 60, which again, the only one I got working was 100 Hz on my ultra wide when set to normal 16:9, then you can still have frame pacing concerns. Even with a stable 100 FPS or higher in-game, the capture comes out looking less smooth than ideal. This is normal for all capture cards. I'm just noting that VRR doesn't magically make this go away. The supported VRR range for the HD60 X is 48 to 120 frames per second. If you drop below 48, you can still end up with tearing. To enable VRR, go to your console settings or GPU control panel and turn it on. If it's not showing up as supported, double check that there isn't a manual enabling required by your TV or monitor. If not, then you may need to play with the EDID pass-through modes on the 4K Capture Utility app. I had to keep toggling mine between internal and display to get the Xbox Series X to see VRR compatibility on my BenQ monitors. There is a consequence here. Audio desync, and frame rate sampling. When recording using 4K Capture Utility and playing Halo Infinite and Call of Duty Warzone with VRR turned on, I get Mixed results. Halo Infinite weirdly swaps between 60 and 120 FPS depending on load rather than just going between the two, so it feels a little weird. Warzone is unlocked and flows between 85 and 120 FPS. That is based on the console performance and how the game is set up, not, unique to this capture card. But both captures here have audio coming in a few frames after the video, and worse yet, it seems VRR has a negative impact on when frames are being sampled for the 60 FPS recording. So half of my Halo Infinite footage, with the game bouncing back and forth between 120 and 60 FPS, comes out as a 30 FPS video file. Like, the file is 60 FPS, in the metadata, but much of the footage just has duplicate frames every other frame, resulting in a 30 FPS feed. Warzone has less of an issue like that, with an occasional one-off duplicate frame, but audio desync is far more noticeable. This is the first generation of VRR supporting cards, and I'm sure there's lots of kinks to be worked out, and I'm sure for many streamers this is still better than having a crap ton of tearing. But it's still kind of disappointed to see regardless. Hopefully they continue to tune the frame sampling algorithms to fix this. The audio desync with Warzone is still present in OBS captures too, with a full 12 frames of delay before my gunshots start sounding after I fire in the game. Halo Infinite also still had a ton of duplicate frames in OBS still. My contacts at Elgato say this isn't expected behavior, so they're looking into it to see what's up. A fix may come down the pipeline at some point. Now, I must admit, the HD60 X is technically not the first capture card to market with VRR support. I noted before that with the new XR1 Pro from EVGA, seemingly on accident, it lets you turn on GSync through the capture card. But that only served to cause massive hitching in the recordings and make it not great. But before that, Pingo released the 4K HDMI Grabber Pro. This is a massive box of a capture card that they sent me in January of last year. I've played with it off and on over the course of multiple months, and I just can't get the damn thing to work. They keep sending me firmware updates, but trying to pass through VRR from my Xbox and GSync from a PC to my LG CX just resulted in constantly cutting out signals, if it ever worked at all. I simply ran out of patience and abandoned it for now, but I'll return to it eventually. But safe to say, the Elgato VRR option has been a massively better experience. A really cool experimental feature of the HD60 X is the ability to do real-time frame rate analysis of variable refresh rate gameplay. Digital Foundry fans rejoice. I've worked with our friends over at DF in the past, and they have some wild custom software set up to perform real-time frame rate analyses of console games, but nothing has been usable for VRR yet. Today, that changes. To use this, go to your app data folder, roaming, Elgato, 4K capture utility, and then edit the settings.xml file. Here, you'll want to change enable VRR logging to true, and then set it to only log when recording. You can set the polling interval. By default, it's once per second, but I set it to 120 or 12 for 120 times per second because I'll be mostly testing 120 Hz games, and that checks the frame rate for every frame. Then launch 4K capture utility and record. Beware! Even though this is an option to only log when recording, it counts flashback recording as recording. So if you have flashback recording on, it will continue logging that entire time that the flashback session is going, and it won't be able to separate your recordings from the full session. Then you're given a massive CSV file with timecode and frame rate separated by semicolons, sometimes with headers, sometimes not for some reason. Logs are stored in that app data folder in a new folder called VRR logs. I do wish this stored with the recordings, or at minimal shared the same file name, but just match up the date with the created times of your files, I guess. Then you can make your own DF-style fancy overlay or use another program to generate an animated graph. I wanted to flex with some cool, sick animated graph from After Effects or something, but every single template or plugin I owned that I bought for After Effects stopped working in version 2020, or after version 2020, which Adobe doesn't even let me download anymore, and the other ones for AE and Premiere only work with tiny datasets and don't animate over time, and the only Resolve one I have found hasn't been updated since 2018 and doesn't work either. F. A plugin to show this in OBS, or even to be able to overlay it real-time in OBS, would be amazing. At the moment, you can't see this information nor log it when using OBS. Speaking of which, this card does not support multi-app, the ability to be recognized in multiple programs at the same time. Bummer. The front of the capture card features a 3.5mm line-in audio jack. This is not a headset combo jack. It can't be used for hearing sound or a headset mic, at least not on its own, but you can run the final mix from your setup of, a mixer interface Go XLR, or if you use a mix amp like the Astro Mix amp or another audio extractor, use the line out from that to pipe into your capture, and then you select analog audio in 4K capture utility. Unfortunately, you can only select analog or HDMI audio here. You cannot mix between them. Lame. If you do want to use this for headset mics or capturing party chat, you can do so with Elgato's ChatLink Pro splitter cable. I don't have this to test at this time. I am beyond stoked to report that the HD60 X is a fantastic choice for retro gamers. Elgato tends to have a bad reputation in the OSSC and RetroTINK communities, but this is usually based on their older lines of cards, not their newer 4K 60 Pro or HD60 S Plus cards, but regardless, this card supports just about everything. Open source scan converter? No sweat. 2x, 3x, 4x, and 5x all run phenomenally. Other than the aspect ratios getting stretched on 2x and 4x, which admittedly happens with most capture cards. RetroTINK 2x Pro 480p works like a breeze, as does 1080p, 1200p, and the awkward 1920 by 1440 4x3 6x mode as well. Again, the aspect ratios are stretched, but a basic aspect ratio control filter in OBS mostly fixes that up. I'm finally adding the Mister to my testing setup since I've had it around forever now. 1080p works fine as expected, but the 1920 by 1440 and the 2048 by 1536 modes work too. That last mode was built for old iPad screens and isn't compatible with much else, but it looks phenomenal on my LG CX OLED and captures in the HD60 X too. This is rad. You can't actually capture it to a native 1536p file, but it means that you can still play in the sharpest quality you want and still have great looking captures. It's not common for any capture card I've tested to be this flexible with retro scalers, but especially a USB one, and especially from Elgato, good stuff. I mentioned earlier that I had a secret weapon for recording 1080p 120Hz VRR from a console like the Xbox Series X while still being able to play in 4K 120Hz VRR on my LG OLED. This is that secret. Enter the HDFury VRROOM, or VRROOM. This is a multi-purpose video device. HDFury makes some bougie HDMI video signal tweakers. I own a bajillion products from them. This thing was not cheap. It was like $500. It's more expensive now. But what it allows you to do is take your incoming full res signal and downscale it to a secondary output. So you can output one to your TV, one to your capture card at a lower resolution while maintaining variable refresh rate and 120 Hz, because you can't just convert VRR to non-VRR footage. And that's what it allows me to do here. I can play on my TV, play Halo, in 4K 120 and capture it at 1080p 120. And when it works, as you can see here, the results are actually quite remarkable. The problem is, at the moment, I just updated the firmware and I'm still getting the issue, but at the moment, I don't know if it can't keep up with the bandwidth or what's going on, but it keeps cutting out. And obviously that defeats the entire purpose of the reason that I bought it. And so I'm going to work with their support and try to figure this out before I get a full formal video finally up on this thing, because I literally just finally got it hooked up and tested today. But conceptually, this is exactly what I need. I'm not sure why it's cutting out and throwing signal errors sometimes, but like I said, when it's working, it is perfect. So I can't sit here and recommend that you buy a $500 box to pair with your $200 capture card just for this purpose, but there are those of you who have already done that before I even got mine. So here's the option for now. Pricing wise, we're looking at $200 for the HD60 X, knocking the older HD60 S Plus down to $180. This is on the higher end of USB capture cards, but it isn't that wild given that it's mostly a first in the VRR category and seems to be so dang good. Elgato also announced the end of life for the HD60 S and Pro finally, just FYI. I reviewed those things 6 years ago. Wowzers. The HD60 X is not a perfect solution, but most of its imperfections come from the software side, which tends to be unreliable and quirky as usual from Elgato. The device in use by other application when a console switches resolution continues to plague me constantly and results in formats that worked fine 1 minute, not working the next. And the frame drops I'm having in Halo could be fixed in software too. Maybe that's being too optimistic, I'm not really sure. The only major bummer, given that this is a first generation VRR card, is that there's no G-Sync. This seriously limits who can get use out of it, especially when Intel doesn't have VRR support over HDMI at all yet. Hopefully Nvidia can get things moving with capture card manufacturers soon to validate for G-Sync. The demand is definitely there. I've seen it for a very long time now. Especially with VRR support on Xbox games being so hit or miss right now, PC is kind of where it's at. But PlayStation getting system-wide VRR support will be huge. I'm very stoked for that as a VRR OLED owner. I think if you're an Xbox Series X or PS5 streamer, or you just want the fastest USB capture card on the market, the HD60 X is a great choice. But if you're waiting on HDMI 2.1 or G-Sync, You're still waiting. If you watch this whole video and you want to learn more about how to use a capture card, check this guide here. Or if you want to perfect your stream audio, check this one over here. I'm EposVox, the Stream Professor. Remember, be kind, rewind.